career in a lot of ways. And so I probably benefited from their, eccentricities more than anything. Yeah.
Eccentric's a broad word. What does it? Because I could
It
describe
is.
my parents, specifically one of them as being eccentric. But
Yeah.
when you say eccentric, what exactly do you mean?
I mean, my dad, well, my whole family, I'm, like a lot. My grandmother was like an immigrant who fled World War One. A lot of Jewish families are defined by the fact that people have been trying to kill Jewish people for a very long time, and my family is no different. A lot of the reasons Jews live where they live and are where they are, and not, in Eastern Europe somewhere, is because people were trying to kill them. And that also shapes, I think, Jewish sensibility to a large degree. I know it did mine, because it's kind of informed by neuroses and trauma to a large degree. So my grandmother is an immigrant, and she met my grandfather, who his parents were immigrants to Winnipeg, which is a very cold, unforgiving part of Canada. They moved to Vancouver ultimately, and had my mother. And my mother wanted to go to Israel to travel. My dad's from Newark, New Jersey, which is especially where he's from, like one of the worst parts of America, from like a kind of crime standpoint, especially at that time in the 70s and 80s. My dad's like a socialist, and moved to a kibbutz in Israel, where him and my mother met, and then moved to Canada. So my dad has always been like incredibly left wing, especially both my parents, but my dad really, like, he would have stayed like essentially living on like a commune his whole life, if he never met my mother, basically. Yeah. And he has like incredible kind of like, I guess it's OCD. I don't know if it's a disorder. I would say he has obsessive compulsive tendencies. And he has Tourette syndrome, so he's twitchy, and I have it as well to some degree, but those are connected, kind of compulsive, compulsion and Tourette's. No shortage of strangeness to draw from when in my family.
What was his relationship like with money?
I'd say not that relevant. I mean, I think I did not grow up with a lot of money, my mother, went to school to be a social worker when I was very young, and then became a social worker. But when I was like a kid, she was a cashier at a department store, and my dad was worked at like a vocational college as an ombudsman, which kind of is like a swing position to some degrees, help facilitates life on the campus. A lot of time was spent working in the game room, from my memory. We grew up in a small apartment, and then I think some people who don't grow up with a lot of money, I think, are taught to really like revere money and kind of put a lot of emphasis on it. And I think other people who don't grow up with a lot of money kind of are taught that it's not that important. And as long as you have enough to do certain things, then that's enough. And it's not something that you should like fetishize or, make the be all end all by any means. And I was definitely more raised like that. Yeah.
Is there sometimes a bit of a paradox when your parents don't value money, and maybe they sometimes struggle with it, that you grow up trying to avoid that struggle?
Definitely. I for sure had some things when I was young where I was afraid of being broke. And I'm sure that for sure informed elements of my ambition. I'm very lucky in that it also coincided with a very strong, like, creative drive, but I definitely, remember being very concerned that we didn't have enough money, and my parents not being that concerned that we didn't have enough money, which probably made me more concerned that we didn't have enough money, because I was like, why aren't they worried we don't have enough money? That was something that was kind of, but then that was when I was like very young. And then as I got older, I saw that, when I got into high school and stuff, I saw that I would be fine. You know what I mean? On the grand scale of things.
In that apartment, when you were quote unquote very young, if I'd asked you, if I said, Seth, what are you going to be when you're older? What would you have responded to me?
I mean, I probably would have said I want to write movies or something like that. I probably would have wanted to be a ninja up until a certain age, a ninja turtle specifically, probably. And then, yeah, I remember when I was probably like 6 or 7 years old is when I started to really want to, like, the idea of making movies became very like fascinating to me. And I was one of those kids with a camera who was like running around making movies. I was obsessed with movies, quoting movies. I wanted to watch. All I want to do is watch movies. I fell in love with movies at a very young age. Yeah.
Was there an influence in your household that inspired that love for movies?
My parents love movies. They're like huge movie fans. They would go to movies. Again, it was one of those things like we did not have a lot of money. We would go to movies all the time. And in Vancouver, Tuesdays was like the cheap movie night for whatever reason. It's a slow night, so maybe they incentivized customers. And almost every Tuesday, we as a family would go to whatever new movie had come out that week. So I saw everything in theaters, like constantly, and I loved it. And my parents, had a VCR and would tape movies off of television. And we had this, I think a lot of, people my age are kind of defined also by like those VHS tapes that you grew up with, because it was like a finite amount of movies. And then I went to high school, me and Evan, across the street from two video rental stores, a Blockbuster and a Rogers, which was like the Canadian competitor. But we would go there every day after school and just like walk the aisles and for hours and rent movies. We go there on the weekends and walk the aisles and rent movies. Like we were, ever since I was young, and then I met my writing partner, who became my producing partner and directing partner, Evan, when I was 12. So I was very young, but ever since then, I can remember I was like obsessed with movies, basically. Yeah.
And stand-up, that came in at 12 years old as well, roughly?
Yeah, for me, I loved comedy in general, and I love stand-up comedy. My parents were big stand-up comedy fans, but truthfully, it was kind of like a means to an end to me, because again, it's funny because it was like weirdly well thought out for being 12 or 13 years old. But I was like, if I do stand-up comedy, at that time, sitcoms were very popular, Seinfeld, things like that. So I was like, the most practical path for me to have some sort of success doing this is I'll start doing stand-up comedy. Maybe I can get an agent, and then maybe I can like get on a sitcom and be like, Ray Romano or Jerry Seinfeld or something like that. And then maybe I can write movies, and that can like turn into a movie career, basically. And that was like, if you were to ask me when I was like 12 years old, like, what is your life going to be like? That's what I would have hoped it would be like,
Remarkable, because most 12-year-olds.
I know.
I'm thinking like that. What was school? What was your relationship like with school? Was there any influence there on you as a man today, that early relationship with school and your peers?
For sure. I mean, the first movie I wrote was Superbad with Evan, and it was very much informed by our high school experience. It's largely based on real things that happened. I would say the educational aspect of school was lost on me. And I, from a very young age, knew that my ultimate life path was not going to, follow, an academic route, and my parents never put that much emphasis on it, honestly. Like, they weren't like, my dad dropped out of college, that they weren't like, you have to do this, I think more than anything, they actually saw that I was like very inspired to do comedy, and I loved movies, and they saw I was willing to work very hard from a very young age. And so, honestly, from the time I entered high school, which was when I was 13, they were like, they didn't care that much that I was not doing that well in high school, because I was always working really hard on writing movies and doing stand-up comedy, like from around that time until I got a little older. But like, they saw I wasn't like lazy. I was just motivated to do something other than school. But the culture of school I loved, and the things that happened at school I loved. And I thought the kids I went to school with were hilarious. And we would go to parties every weekend, and people's parents would be out of town, and we were trying to hook up with girls and buy beer, and our friends were getting licenses and fake IDs and all this shit. And I thought it was awesome and hilarious. And I went to like a public high school in like a big city, there was like 3,000 kids at my school. Vancouver's a real big metropolitan city with downtowns and so, neighborhoods, and the good area, the bad, you could really get into trouble in Vancouver. So it provided a lot of like adventures, and I loved it. And I wasn't one of those people, Evan either. It's not like we were popular or cool or anything, but we weren't like tortured by high school. We were like, this is a fun adventure and we can have fun here. And especially if we don't put too much stakes on the actual, like, doing well here part of it.
Adam, at 15 years old, you went to a Canadian comedy festival. Do you remember? I'm sure you remember.
Yeah. I entered like a competition, I think it was. And I did pretty well. I placed pretty well in the competition. I was okay. I was pretty good at stand-up comedy. Like it was, yeah.
Do you remember the instance where Jerry Seinfeld showed up?
Yes, I do. I came, that was actually, I was auditioning to get into the Just for Laughs Festival in Los Angeles. And I show up and it's during the day, which is not great. There's not that many people there. It's maybe like 5 o'clock. It's not a good time to stand up comedy. I'm like 15 years old. I flew in for this, There's comics going up and doing their thing. There's like the scout from the Just for Laughs Festival there. And like, I'm about to go up and I'm next. And the MC's about to introduce me. And and someone comes over and they're like, Jerry Seinfeld is about to show up and he's going to go up instead of you. And I was like, what? I'm like, I'm here to audition for this thing. And they're like, yeah, well, he'll go up and then you'll go up after. And I'm like, are you going to go after Jerry Seinfeld? And they're like, yes. And so he goes up. He his show is still on. Like, he's as famous as you can, as a comedy star as there is alive at that moment. And it's what you're hoping. It's like you go to a stand-up comedy club at that time hoping Jerry Seinfeld will come in. And then it happened. And these people, like, it's like they won the lottery. And he comes and he just, like, annihilates. And then he gets off stage. And then they're like, and now, like, from Vancouver, 15-year-old Seth Rogen. And, and I bombed horribly. And I did not get into the Just for Laughs Comedy Festival. And I told Jerry Seinfeld that story, and he was completely uninterested. He could have cared less.
It seems like a tough thing for a 15-year-old, a pretty horrific firing line for a 15-year-old to put themselves in, stand-up comedy.
Yeah, I think part of it, honestly, was informed by like my overall like naivete to some degree, but I also, I was good enough at it that it instantly wasn't like a viscerally painful experience. You know what I mean? And it's probably, I played some sports in high school, but it was probably a similar. I imagine it's a similar mentality where you're like, yeah, there's stakes to this and there's ups and downs to this, but overall I'm good at it and I seem to be progressing in the right direction. So it's worth the stress of it in order to pursue it, And at times it's phenomenal and as fun as you would hope anything would be, But also, honestly, what was more fun was at that time, me and Evan started to write Superbad. And that was like what I really loved doing. And like, I liked doing stand-up comedy and writing stand-up jokes, but like, I loved sitting with Evan and writing a movie. And to me, that was like, at the time, it's frustrating because you're like, will this ever get made? Is this pointless? Are we wasting our time? Is this just a silly pursuit? But it was still, I just loved it,
There's this through line in all your sort of creative work, often, which is about like making people laugh.
Yep.
Have you ever figured out like why, because I've sat here with a lot of comedians and there always seems to be something about comedians where, I don't know, some instance when they, maybe they were younger or some kind of inspiration in their life, which made them somewhat compelled to, and almost energized by the pursuit of making other people laugh and happy. Does that resonate with you? And have you ever identified where that comes from in you, that pursuit of making people laugh and happy?
I think for me, I think some comedians have like a dark origin story, you know what I mean? I don't, I think for me, it was like something I liked and something I was good at and something that I was very like encouraged and fostered to do from a very young age. And I was lucky enough to find another guy my age who was as good at it as I was and as interested at doing it as I was, which is like miraculous. Like, I had a lot of like, I read part of that Malcolm Gladwell book, and I'm not, about the
Outliers.
about the miraculous kind of set of circumstances that it takes to become like remotely successful in this terrible world of ours. You know what I mean? And like, I think it was things like my parents were big comedy fans, so I saw comedy from a very young age. I'm from Canada, which is like a place that acclaims comedy and respects comedy. So culturally, I'm like from a place where comedy is like, a relevant part of the culture, Canadians, some of their biggest like exports are comedians and comedy shows. Lorne Michaels is Canadian, SCTV, a lot of some of the greatest comedians of all time are Canadian, and so it's something that was always kind of just always a part of like the DNA of being a Canadian person, I think, to some degree as well. Also, I'm from Vancouver, where they made movies. Not to say it's like I grew up in Hollywood, but like you would see movie sets around. You would see, I went to a high school. They shot some movies at the high school because it was a very like cinematic looking high school. So you would see trucks and stuff like that. I didn't know anyone who worked in the entertainment industry, but like you kind of would see it around. So it made it a little more obtainable. And if we lived like in the middle of fucking nowhere and it just seemed like completely abstract, you know what I mean? So I think that like my path is honestly one of like being supported and working hard and being very diligent, but also like having an environment that kind of like bolstered my ambition. You know what I mean? Yeah.
16 years old, you get a part in Freaks and Geeks.
Yeah.
And that brings you to LA with your family.
Yeah.
What? Your entire family came to LA?
Well, my parents. My sister was in college. Yeah.
And I read that they'd lost their jobs at around that time.
Yes.
And that made you the sole breadwinner in the house.
Basically, yes.
Well, did that feel like pressure? Being 16 years old and being the breadwinner for your house because your parents have lost their jobs.
In a way, it felt like an alleviation of pressure because after I remember my dad telling me, like, after like 3 months or 6 months of being on Freaks and Geeks, he's like, "You've made more money in this time than I've made my entire life put together." So, like, if anything, was like an amazing alleviation of a weight, because there was money all of a sudden. For the first time in our lives, things could be paid for easily, and so I was more than happy to provide for everybody because I suddenly had access to an amount of money that was like absurd compared to the amount of money I grew up with access to, or anyone in my family grew up with access to,
Your work ethic, which I've read about over and over again throughout your book and throughout various interviews you've done, seems to be pretty spectacular. And one of the quotes that I read is, if there were any kind of dark driving force behind your early ambitions, quote, it would be some sense of financial insecurity.
Yeah, probably. But that's gone. Which is maybe why I don't make as many things as I used to.
That's an interesting journey to go on, being driven by having that sort of financial insecurity, developing a real sort of strong relationship with work, and then that falling away.
Yeah, and it fell away pretty fast, I think, honestly. Like, I think by the time there was a point. So yeah, I was on Freaks and Geeks, and then Undeclared, and then I didn't work for years. But by then, it felt like my parents were like incapable of making enough money to survive on their own also. So like, once I had some money, like, it was just bonus money, you know what I mean? Like, part of what had happened is they lost their jobs and we lived in a house. So we sold our house in Vancouver, and that's why everyone moved to LA. So there was like a little more money available because we had sold our house. So like, it's not like my parents were like just like a leech on, they were able to like make a baseline level of like survivable income. So when I had more money, it just, it kind of just added a cushion of comfort. And then there were times, then they moved back to Canada when I was like 18, and I was in LA, and that's around when I became unemployed for years and years. So I did then start to have financial burden, but it was like a it was my own financial burden. And it was not, I did not feel like I was letting my whole family down or not providing for my whole family. It was more, I just myself was like, oh, I might have to move back in with my family because I might not be able to afford to live in Los Angeles for longer because I was unemployed for years, basically. Yeah.
You were unemployed for years and years.
Yeah.
After that first role on Freaks and Geeks.
Yeah, we did Freaks and Geeks, and we did a show called Undeclared that was on Fox in 2000, 2001, and then I basically didn't work for like 3 years essentially. Yeah.
What's going through you're presumably doing auditions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Does it ever, like, what's that phase like of unemployment? Most people quit at that point. That's the point where you say, fuck this.
That didn't even occur to me. I did not. I was pretty kind of had like a chip on my shoulder to some degree. I was writing a lot still, we were still, that's probably when we wrote Pineapple Express, so we had finished Superbad. No one wanted to make it. But we thought it was good, so we kind of put it on the shelf. We're like, let's write another movie. And then we wrote Pineapple Express. So we were busy, and we thought it was awesome. And we thought both the movies were awesome. And in general, we were also getting like very positive feedback as writers. We just weren't getting like hired to do anything, and no one would make our movie. So it was this weird mixture of things kind of being like encouraging and very frustrating at the same time, and that's almost like the worst part about kind of being in that part of your career, which is the part of the career most people who live in Hollywood are in, which is one where it's like any given phone call is one that is like making your fucking life, or one that is yet another door slamming in your face that you have to like just suck up and keep moving forward. You know what I mean? And so that's happening a lot at that time. Yeah, and seeing your friends also start to do very well and start to make things, that is, it's very encouraging in some ways, but you inherently get very jealous, and you start to doubt yourself, and you start to doubt if you are good enough to do it, or if anyone will ever like see in you what you see in yourself, but yeah, it's though it's pretty warm in LA usually, so it's easy to just hang out and keep plugging along.
What's your you use the word doubt yourself there? What's your journey been with self-doubt? People would obviously look at you and assume that you have zero self-doubt because you've been so successful at what you've done.
I think all creative people and people who have creative pursuits in their life have self-doubt. Like it's impossible to put yourself out there, I think, from my experience and from meeting all the creative people I've met in my life, from people who, it's their first day on set, and they have one line, to Steven Spielberg. They all have self-doubt. They're all worried people won't like what they're doing, that people are going to think it's stupid, that they're going to think they're stupid for wanting to do it, that they're going to just reject it and by proxy reject them. That is from my experience pretty constant across the board for all creative types who genuinely like care about what they do. I'm sure there are some people who technically like are maybe actors or something and do not have any of that, but they're probably not very good and don't care that much about what they do. You know what I mean? But in general, from my experience, I would say that applies to creative people is self-doubt. And for me, it comes in waves, you make a thing everyone likes, gets a little better. You make a thing everyone fucking hates, it gets a little worse. And that's a part of also doing what I do, is like you get like there, it's like it's funny. I was saying to someone I work with the other day, like I'm at the point, it's funny in my career where like not a lot of people are in a position to like yell at me in my job, but like the New York Times will like publish an entire article like saying I suck at my job. And so like that's the trade-off, is like I've worked my way up to not having to deal with that much like personal conflict and face-to-face conflict, but I will have like just like a cultural institution tell everyone that I suck, and so that's kind of like that will add self-doubt, things like that, and so it's for me, it's for me something that's present, but I try not to let it stop me from doing the things that I think are interesting and the things that I think I would enjoy watching.
Has it ever hurt you?
Oh yeah. I mean, what self-doubt? I'd say a lack of self-doubt has maybe hurt me at times.
I mean, like the criticism, like someone.
Oh yeah, of course it hurts everyone. Yes, very much so. I think if most critics knew how much it hurt the people that made the things that they are writing about, they would second guess the way they write these things. Like, it's devastating. It takes years. I know people who never recover from it. Honestly, decades of being hurt by, because it's very personal. It's not like it is personal. And so it is devastating when you are being like institutionally told that your personal expression was bad. Like, that is like devastating, and something that people carry with them literally their entire lives. And I get why. It fucking sucks.
I was reading through various moments in your life where, I mean, you've had back-to-back successes, so it's hard to find something
That's definitely not true.
No, you have. You seem to, I mean, from the bird's eye view, you look at your work, your portfolio, you go,
I've been trending well.
Yeah, you've been trending well. The thing you talk about, and you've spoken about in interviews, is Green Hornet, where you received some critical reviews for that. Can you zoom me, if I was a fly on the wall in one of those moments where you've received that feedback is coming in and it's coming in, critically, what would I see if I was a fly on the wall in your home? Like, do you stay in your bed? Do you like, what's the human impact it has on you?
It's different things. And I think there's different, and that's another funny thing about making movies is like, and having like, and just being like a person who works a lot, is like life goes on. Like, you could be making another movie as your movie is bombing, which is a funny thing because it's bittersweet because like you know that things will be okay. You're already working. You know what I mean? If the fear is the movie bombs and you won't get hired again, well, you don't have to worry about that. You've been hired. It's too late. But it's an emotional conundrum at times, just dealing with that and navigating that. For Green Hornet, it's fine. Literally, like the critics the reviews were coming out and it was pretty bad and people just kind of like hated it. Like, it seemed like a thing people just were taking like joy in disliking a lot. You know what I mean? But it opened to like $35 million, which was like, I think at the time, the biggest opening weekend I'd ever been associated with in any capacity. And so it was also like, it did pretty well. And it was a funny thing where it really didn't, that one, and that's what's nice sometimes is like, you do get, you can grasp for some sense of success at times, but I honestly think things like The Interview were more like painful as far as like people really taking joy and talking shit about it and really kind of questioning, the types of people that would want to make a movie like that in general. Like, I think, that felt far more personal. I think Green Hornet felt like I just had fallen victim to like, which was true, a big fancy thing, which was like, super, and we were just kind